All right, Mark. So you are like a generation or half a generation separated from me. And so if I say
Half a generation? No, I don't know. Are we?
12 years,
12 years, but like you were born in
93,
93. So what generation are you?
I'm technically millennial.
Well, if you look at different charts, I'm technically millennial as well, because they say some charts say millennial ended in or started in 80. Some say it started in 82. I'm 81.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Huh.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Okay.
I'm guessing that if I was to say to you that I met a burnout or that person is a burnout, that you would have a specific kind of image in your mind of that person.
Well, the funny thing is, the first thing that came to mind is like a drug addict.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
In my peers, that's not common language. Like I only know that because like my mom has like used that language as sort of like an educational, not like towards people, but like educationally.
Right. Meth head or heroin user is kind of what that.
Yeah. Or even like
mind.
a broader, more negative term for like goth styling back in the day too.
Okay. Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about.
No.
We're going to talk about burnout, not
Right.
burnouts.
Yeah. Not burnouts. Although, can we? No, we're not going to go there. We're not that.
We're not that. No. Maybe we'll have an LAC, a licensed addiction counselor, on someday, and we can talk about drug culture in America and
there we go.
Dive into that, but not today.
No.
Today,
we're talking about
burning out.
Burning out. How do you respond? Because you and I choose, I think is the right word. We choose what we're doing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think that's a fair statement. Like, I've chosen to be a professor. I've chosen to write books. I've chosen to speak. I've chosen to be a counselor and run a counseling program, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Which means that all the responsibility is on us.
Right.
Like we're responsible for all of the busyness that we've engaged with.
Exactly. And yet, I don't know about you, but I get really frustrated at times when somebody insinuates, well, you're busier than I am, so why don't you just let me know when you're available? Or, man, you must be really busy. I'm like, okay, so what is that supposed to mean?
Yeah.
Like, where are you going with that?
Well, and I think I get frustrated too when people out of their care say you just need to stop the things you're doing.
Right.
Because that also feels like, yes, there's truth in that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I need to find better balance at times. And we've talked about that on the show. But it feels like it's just like it's not as simple as that. I can't just cut out a portion of my professional life.
No, and this is not directed at anybody. So if anybody's listening that knows me, I'm not directing this towards you. I have had people in my life that just, you know, they have 3 or 4 things and they aren't able to function, or they're not like able to finish anything.
Right.
And they look at me and go, wow, you know, you're just, how do you do it? I'm like, what do you mean? How do I do it?
Yeah.
Like, this is something I've chosen. This is a life that I've dreamed of for a long time. Well, you know, I had one person maybe 3 or 4 years ago just insinuate that I'm not there for my family. I'm like, you don't know me. Like, where do you get off talking about my life? Like, nobody, like, you know, nobody knows. Well, now they're going to, but nobody knows that, like, I wake up without an alarm at 4:30 most days, and I do self-care, devotional time, and get started on my work day before my kids wake up. And then when they wake up, everything gets put away for a couple hours, and then I have breakfast with them most days, you know, and then I'm back in the office working, and then I'll take, you know, if I at home, take a lunch break, but then, you know, if I'm out in the office, you know, then I'm home by 6 o'clock at night and have maybe 1 event, 2 events a week in the evenings. But so it makes me wonder, and this is maybe a different conversation altogether, but it makes me wonder what most people do with their lives. Because it's like, you know, my life is full. It's good. Yeah, maybe I am working 60, 70 hours a week, but I've got time for myself. Yeah. But it's not always been that way. You know, we were talking before the podcast just about how last year felt, you know, and I know it's a unique thing, but like burnout was real for me. And it felt weird because as long as you've known me, I've had a joy for this profession. I've had a joy for trying new things. And
Yeah.
if something doesn't work, we're like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's coming at a different angle. And I
Yeah.
just didn't care last year
Yeah.
much at all.
Which I think is a often forgotten symptom of burning out,
Right.
of compassion fatigue and just care fatigue.
Compassion fatigue is, yeah, absolutely. Have you ever talked to somebody about that and they kind of look at you cross-eyed?
Yeah, a little bit.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Compassion fatigue.
Well, most of the time those people have a lower capacity for compassion anyways.
Sure.
Is what I've noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think like also with this conversation, like you mentioned, like last year was a lot of burnout. I think there's this misconception too in our culture that burning out is the end.
Oh, sure.
Like that you don't return from burnout because it's the end of whatever you're doing.
I'll be very transparent and honest that if I had gotten my way last year, it might have been.
Yeah.
But God had other plans, and that's good.
Yeah.
Other people had encouragement and that kind of stuff, and it was a good reminder that, yeah, burnout is not the end. It can be a reset.
Yeah. It can absolutely be an end, but it doesn't.
No, sure. It doesn't have to be. Right. I think that's a big deal. And I it's funny. I felt like I had I had people in my life over the last year that felt a little bit like Job, and if you don't know Job, a character in the Bible who life just kind of fell apart for him, lost everything. And people were saying like, see, this is what you should do this and you should do that. Look, what did you do to get this?
Yeah.
I had a couple people in my life ask that question.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, what? No, it's not because I am so busy that I've tanked. It was the compassion fatigue. It was the emotional output on personal fronts that was happening, on professional fronts that was happening. And it was like this perfect storm. And it was, it felt like I was like an airplane coming out of the sky. And, I didn't crash and blow up. I just skidded across the field, lost my landing gear, all that kind of stuff. And now we're in a rebuilding phase. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
well, and I think there's this other aspect, like as achievers or as like,
achievers is a good way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we fall into with all of our busyness. I think that, like I said earlier, the tendency is like one or the other. Like you're either doing everything and burning out, or you should stop everything so that you can take care of yourself. And that's why we talk about balance and tension and
rhythms and
boundaries and rhythms, because, I might have the capacity for a different rhythm than somebody else. And they may not even see all of the different beats that I'm playing,
Sure.
And so I think it's important to recognize that, but also this practice of self-reflection to recognize the warning signs. For instance, this last week, I've been really struggling with just the phrase I've been using is coming to the end of myself. Like there's just not enough of me to spread over through the week.
Right.
And one of the ways that I'm noticing that is through small symptoms of compassion fatigue, where I end a session with a client and I know that I was present and that I had care, but then maybe a week later, something sparks in my mind that reminds me of that session, and that compassion is gone because I think like, how silly is it that they were struggling with this? And that to me is the sign of like, oh, okay, I'm running out of fuel in my tank. And if I don't take care of this soon, I'm not going to be able to move forward without taking a harder break.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think those were my rhythms several years ago where I'd go, and then I'd get sick and I'd burn out for a week or, I'd go on vacation. Well, not vacation, but it was kind of vacation, go to my in-laws' house, for a holiday, to get away. And I'd get there and the next day I'd be laid up in bed with a sore throat and a fever, or not COVID, but be sick. And that would be my body's way of telling me like, you're pushing too hard. And I ignored that piece of it. And so, I think that's a good point of coming to the end of ourselves. I think in a lot of times burnout isn't, and people would argue with me on this one, I think burnout is inevitable at times, just because of the stage of life. And I think there's ways
necessary even.
Well, say that again.
I think that there can be elements of burnout. And I think, okay, I'm going to give this caveat. I think there's going to be a tendency in this episode to feel like we're advocating for unhealth. And I want myself and our listeners to reflect on everything else that we've said in the context of this show, that we're not saying to put yourself in a situation where you're burning yourself out.
Right.
But I think like, even looking back at like our experiences in our master's and your doctorate program, like that was a season where we had a clear objective, a clear timeline, a lot of work, but also some very necessary things that we had to do at the same time. And so it was a season of wearing through or burning through our fuel tank.
Right.
And so, you know, there's the option still of like, we don't have to burn out.
Right.
But there's that necessity that could lead to burnout too. Maybe that's what I mean.
I think that makes sense. I think thinking of last year too, that was a mix of both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was reflecting with my wife that if we didn't have 3 parents diagnosed with cancer and one almost die, like I don't think I would have burned out.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a difficult year professionally. But I think I would have had the margins, you know, and so it was kind of that cataclysmic event. But I do think you're right. There are seasons that we have to push through. I think I'm thinking of like an athlete, you know, a professional football player, running back, right? He has got to push himself to a place of almost burnout in those sprints because he needs to, you know, is practicing, needs to get to the end of himself to see how far he can push himself so that when he gets the ball and is running down, you know, the field to make a touchdown, he's got to beat everybody around him. But that's not his every day.
You're sparking a really interesting concept for me. There was a time in my life where I thought I was burnt out, but what was really happening was that I was struggling with moral injury, which I think we may have touched on in a previous episode. But anyways, like it took me a while to recognize that it wasn't burnout, it was injury. And we have to care for burnout very differently than we care for injury. And so I think maybe there's this ability to be a little bit more subtle in our language too, of what if instead of talking about burnout, we talk about just coming to a point of exhaustion. And we don't want to, in our practice, get to the point where there's risk of injury, because we can recover from exhaustion and sore muscles and a hard workout and really pushing ourselves. We can recover from that. We kind of have an idea of like, we need to sleep more. We need to drink more fluids. We need to stretch. We need like all of those things. And we can put really clear, easy metaphors.
Right.
So like, okay, that means literally drink more water.
Right.
That also means literally sleep more, but also take time to rest and spend time with family. And then the stretching could be like, do things that use those muscles in very different ways that are still relaxing.
Yeah.
So
like take the stairs into the elevator.
Yeah. Or even like, you know, real world example, like if you are somebody who, let's say like you are a leader or a manager or something, like leadership's the thing. Like, rather than leading in your normal capacities, what does it look like to like lead an activity at home with your family? Like really be a leader in a very managerial way, but do it with something really fun, like a game, like something that stretches that muscle in a different way. I think the risk is we don't want that to be injury, because injury is very different.
Well, sure. Right.
We can't do those. If we do those things with like a broken leg, it's not going to fix it.
Right.
It's going to make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because I think, we do take, and I know that as an empath, a feeler, you know, that moral injury can, if not recognized, can definitely lead to burnout.
Oh yeah,
because I'm not taking care of myself and not recognizing and differentiating what it is.
Yeah,
and I really will you know, say that probably the last half of the last 3 and 4 months of 2020, most of it was moral injury.
Yeah.
I mean, for me,
you
know, let's just be honest. It was my feelings got hurt. Like, you know, make it plain and simple.
It was hurt. It was
hurt.
Wounding.
Yes.
It wasn't weariness.
No, but that led to weariness.
Yeah. Because if I was to, you know, walk around with a broken rib all day, I might be able to function, but it's going to take far more energy to function with that broken rib.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this distinction is really, because it was a real changing point in my life when, because my moral injury was with the church. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take some time off. I'm not going to go to Sunday services. I'm not going to, do small groups. I'm just going to take a break, and I'm going to do my faith on my own and then plug in once I've had that like vacation, which is like what we say you should do with burnout is like, you should take a break. You should rest and breathe and care for yourself. And then you can go back into it, which I think is true. But with injury, you can't just rest away injury.
Right.
And even if you do, so let's take that broken rib. If it's out of place, it's going to try to heal itself, but it might heal in a way that's really bad for my internal organs.
Right.
It might stab me in my gut the way that it's not supposed to, because it healed that way.
Right.
And so once you recognize this is not just quote unquote burnout, this is quote unquote injury, or this is a practice injury or something. Like, it doesn't have to be moral injury. It can just be like, this is not just weariness, this is wounding. And if it's wounding, the best thing we can do is acknowledge that and then do the work to heal that, because I'm going to approach a wound very differently. Right. I'm going to try to find bandages. I'm going to care for that wound. I'm going to be really careful of recognizing that it's going to be tender. And if it's touched, like, it's could cause more harm. And so I need to be protective. I need to have somebody look at it, make sure it's not getting infected. Right. Like, it's a very different approach.
It is.
And so with the church thing, like, I had to do that.
And a mindset, it's a different mindset altogether.
Yeah.
Too.
And once I changed that mindset, like, it was still hard work because it had time to kind of set in a bad place, but it was actually productive now. Like, there was actually growth and healing and help that was occurring, rather than before it was just isolation. Because I thought that was what I needed to do. And it just didn't, like, every time I would go back, that wound would get touched and I'd be like, oh, I'm still burned out.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that requires awareness. Requires people speaking into your life. That requires tough conversations, and I wonder how many of us have the privilege of having those things. Like, I have people in my life that I know I can have those tough conversations with. I know that will pull me aside and kind of give me a verbal lashing of like, come on, man. Yeah. Like, this is really what it is. What are you going to do about it, type of thing. But I wonder how many people have that. Yeah. And I was talking to somebody the other day. I was doing something for another organization that I'm on the board of, and they were just talking about. I was doing just a conversation around mental health, and I show this chart that talks about just kind of when a trauma happens, the stages we go through. There's not stages of grief, per se, because that doesn't really exist. But the journey of grief after an injury, trauma,
or the task
loss, or
model too.
Yeah, the task model and that kind of stuff. And one person asked the question, well, what happens if somebody is stuck in this process? What do we do? And I said, 9 times out of 10, most people don't realize that they're stuck. They think they're justified in being angry, or they're justified in being fearful or disgusted or sad. If you look at the task model or that process, okay, yeah, I mean, there's parts of that we need to work through. But when you're stuck, I think most people don't realize they're stuck. And that's where you have to have people in your life that are speaking into that. And this is such an important piece, why we have to be so intentional about being aware. And I was just telling the individual that asked the question, I said, I don't know where I would be if I hadn't gone through my master's and my PhD and my own counseling. Like, I had counseling when I was 12, 13 years old after my suicide attempt, and that kind of stuff was beneficial. But I'm like, I don't know where I'd be. And I said, that to me, I know this might be a different conversation, but I think the reason we're able to have this conversation about burnout and moral injury is because we've been through it. We have the awareness around it. I wish this stuff was common knowledge and common sense again, this is why we do, you and I, this is what drives us. This is why we're doing the Mayfield Collective. This is why we have Mayfield Counseling. This is why we go out and speak. This is why we do the podcast.
Yeah.
Is how do we get this information to the masses?
Yeah.
Because when people hear it, they're like, oh my gosh, why haven't I thought of that? Well,
because you were never taught, or it never came up. Like, yeah, I think you're right. A lot of what we know is experience, both in our own lives, but also through our masters. And, honestly, living vicariously through clients of seeing their experiences that are far outside of ours and being able to seek to understand is such a beautiful experience for us. Because there are traumas that my clients have experienced that I will hopefully never experience.
Hopefully, yeah.
But I've seen pre, during, and post of that experience for that person. And I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, the things that are helpful, the things that are soothing, comforting, help, like repairing in the midst of that. And then I'm able to extrapolate for the next client or for myself. Like, okay, I know this is true about humanity, or I see this path because I have an outside perspective, and I can take that information and I can start applying it. And I mean, to be honest, as a kid, I didn't have that skill at all. Like I was not able to learn vicariously ever. Like I always had to do it myself in order to learn. Even if I knew for a fact, like this is a bad idea, I had to do it myself so that I could know it's a bad idea.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Which has changed, fortunately, in my adult life. But I think there is a lot of beauty of being able to hear from other people who have gone through that experience and be able to then take that information and apply it to yourself. And I think I really like your metaphor of like the football player, because I think with the football player, they aren't just practicing on their own.
Right.
Not only do they have their teammates that they're doing this with, but they have a coach. They have, if they're a professional football player, they have the doctor or the sports medicine person.
Psychologist.
They have all of these people around them that are trying to offer support. So they're able to call out signs of like, hey, you're pulling this muscle too hard. And if you keep doing this, you're going to cause injury.
Right.
And being able to listen to that.
Or if you don't drink enough water, you're going to burn out. Or, absolutely. Well, that goes back to just the importance of community, importance of relationship and collaboration and everything that we hold dear, that I think has been really disrupted this last year.
Very.
And we're coming out of that. I really believe that we're coming out of 2020. We might see the effects of 2020 for a while, but
we'll talk about it for years and years.
There's still things that are changing that are really encouraging.
Yeah.
I would encourage our listeners, as we wrap this up, just to really think through, take stock. Where are you? I don't know if we can do this, but can we link a compassion fatigue self-test to this episode?
Yeah.
Or at least have some, give people some resources.
Yeah.
I think it's just good to know. I always do I try to do a compassion fatigue self-test maybe once a quarter, just to kind of make sure that and I try to be honest with myself, and to see where I'm at.
Yeah.
Because you need a baseline. And it's not a judgment. It's just where am I? Where am I starting? I spoke with a bunch of leaders about this a couple of weeks ago, and I just said, it's good just to find out where you are. Where's the baseline? And so you can improve from there.
Yeah. And I think this is also a good tie-in. I've had a concept for years and years and years of mental health checkups. And I think this is a really good thing to approach a counselor with. And
we tried that as an advertising thing for Mayfield because it's really important.
It is. And what it can look like is call your therapist or call us, and we set up basically an intake. And it's not like you're signing up for like 15 sessions. You can really just sign up for that one session.
Yeah.
And the goal is, you're going to have a lot of paperwork on the front end before the session so that we can really spend our time in the session focused on what's happening in life. But it's focused on how am I doing and what can I be doing to help me grow?
Right. Yeah.
Just checking in, like, the same way we do with the doctor. You look healthy, your blood pressure seems well within healthy ranges, your weight is within healthy ranges, you're complaining about these 2 ailments that you're noticing. Here's some of the things you can try.
Right.
And if it doesn't work, come back and let's reevaluate.
That's kind of, I started seeing a counselor about 2 months ago. Saw him for like 2 weeks in a row, then every other week.
Yep.
And then now we're down to, it's been quick, but we're down to, every other month.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have that check-in. And so I'm going to keep them every other month.
Yeah.
And just invest in that way.
Yeah. Just having somebody that you can check in with and know that it's not like, it's not going to impact the rest of your world. Like that counselor is not going to, call your parents or call your boss or call your spouse.
Post it on social media.
Yeah. They're just there for you.
Yep.
Yeah.